Welcome to Mrbeefys Can of Pop News, or Beefy's Pop, whatever you want to call it. Either way, we're here to cover all kinds of pop culture news, whether it's comic book news, horror, video games, movies, who knows. Some good, some bad, some happy, some sad. Anyways, let's get on to the video. So Lanterns, episode 2 just dropped, and the show is doing great. The numbers are fucking huge. The review scores are also great. And even with all that being said, there's still some people, Snyder fanboys, that are out there that just want to shit on everything and try to, look more deeper into something than what it is. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The show is certified fresh, 94%, with an average audience score of 82%. People love it. And Lanterns shines bright with 9.3 million views in the first 3 days. Biggest launch for a DC show. And that's a good sign. I mean, people love Green Lantern. Green Lantern is a great character with great rich history. Not just Hal, Jon Stewart, Guy Gardner, Kyle Rayner, Jessica Cruz. I think there's a few more. I haven't read the comics here recently, so I'm a little out of it. But let's get into this. Episode 2. This is the leading title of the post. This is coming from comicbooksnews. James Gunn's Lanterns, Episode 2, turns Hal Jordan into Jon Stewart's White Man. Now, with that being said, let's talk about all the reasons why this is fucking wrong, and these people in charge, they don't understand these characters. And that might just be because they're partly from that old DC universe still, and they're just clinging on to it. But the biggest problem is that this turns a short piece of dialogue between Jon Stewart and Zoe Macon into a claim about an entire Hal Jordan-Jon Stewart relationship. Now, the biggest problem I have from this article is that it turns a short piece of dialogue between Jon Stewart and Zoe Macon into a claim about the entire Hal Jordan-Jon Stewart relationship. That goes considerably beyond what the episode actually establishes. How's your white man? That's the line that is getting people. It does not mean Hal is being reduced to a racial stereotype. The article argues that Hal Jordan has become Jon Stewart's white man, and that the show is reducing their partnership to racial shorthand. But that's an interpretation of Zoe's joke, not an objective description of Hal and Jon's relationship. The context is that Zoe is talking about her own husband, William Macon, and making a broader comment about wealthy white men being eccentric. She then jokingly applies the phrase, "your white man," to Hal because Jon is working with an older white Green Lantern. Jon's response doesn't establish that he views Hal primarily through race. In fact, Jon immediately talks about Hal's actual behavior. Hal sent him to retrieve something, and Jon is trying to determine whether he can trust him. That's a very different thing from the article's conclusion. The article ignores the actual mentor-protege dynamic. This is probably the biggest flaw. The series establishes Hal as Jon's mentor, with Hal training Jon to become his replacement. DC's own pre-release material explicitly described Hal training Jon and their relationship as tense, because Hal knows Jon is effectively his successor. Episode 2 continues that dynamic. Other episode coverage describes Hal and Jon as investigating the mystery together rather than the show simply presenting Hal as an oppressive older white guy and Jon as his subordinate. So when Cosmic Book News says the veteran is set up as the man who can't be trusted, that's overstating the scene. Jon is questioning whether Hal can be trusted because Hal is withholding information and behaving strangely, not because the show establishes that Hal is untrustworthy because he's white. It conflates William Macon with Hal Jordan. The article spends a lot of time connecting William Macon's characterization to Hal. Wealthy white rancher, play cowboy, builds castles, savior complex, white privilege. Then it essentially transfers that framing onto Hal because Hal is also white. That's a false equivalence. William Macon is a specific character with his own personality, wealth, and behavior. Hal Jordan isn't established as sharing those characteristics simply because he's also a white man. The episode is actually giving John and Hal a completely different relationship. Older veteran Lantern training younger replacement Lanterns. The article treats one joke as the show's thesis. The most obvious example is episode 2 puts that thesis in a character's mouth. And that's commentary, not evidence. The article had already decided that Lanterns was supposedly sneering at royal white people in episode 1. Then it interrupts episode 2's dialogue as confirmation of that theory. That's essentially confirmation bias. A stronger analysis would first establish what the characters actually do and say, then determine what themes emerge. It ignores the larger Green Lantern story happening in episode 2. Episode 2 isn't primarily about race, it's advancing the Manhunter mystery, John's developing abilities, Hal's investigation, and the introduction to, finally, Sinestro. The episode's major mythology development is that John learns about the possible surviving Manhunters, and Hal subsequently goes to investigate the information, eventually encountering Sinestro. Cosmic Book News gives enormous interpretive weight to roughly one conversation while largely ignoring the episode's actual Green Lantern mythology. Hal Jordan was reduced to John Stewart's white man is super fucking misleading. The title itself, I mean, damn. Episode 2 turns Hal Jordan into John Stewart's white man. It's just wild. That is the opening, or that's the title of the article that they chose. That isn't even what actually happens. Hal remains the experienced Green Lantern. John remains the inexperienced Lantern being trained. Their relationship is complicated, but the show hasn't suddenly rewritten Hal as merely the white guy in John's life. In fact, the series' central premise is explicitly about Hal passing the torch to John. DC's own material describes Hal as seeing John as his replacement and struggling with that transition. That's much more relevant to understanding their relationship than Zoe's joke. The bottom line, I think the article is wrong because it takes a legitimate observation, Zoe using the white man jokingly to describe Hal, and builds an unsupported political, racial interpretation around it. You can reasonably criticize the scene if you think the dialogue is heavy-handed, but that's different from claiming the show has reduced Hal Jordan to a racial stereotype and made John Stewart's relationship with him fundamentally about race. The episode itself doesn't establish that. If anything, its more defensible reading is Hal equals John's difficult older mentor and predecessor. John equals Hal's reluctant successor. Zoe, she equals making a joke about both Hal and her husband being older white men. And lastly, Cosmic Book News taking the joke and making it into a larger claim about the show's politics. So despite what the article wants you to believe, Lanterns is actually doing a lot right. The show is giving us a grounded, character-driven Green Lantern story instead of rushing through the mythology. Hal Jordan feels like a veteran who has years of experience behind him, while John Stewart is still learning, questioning, and finding his place. The mentor and successor dynamic gives both characters something meaningful to work with. The show is also taking its time with the mystery. We're getting clues, strange characters, questions about the Manhunters, and the larger conspiracy without immediately explaining everything. That's how you build intrigue. And most importantly, Hal and John actually feel like characters. They disagree, they don't completely trust each other, and they're not instantly best friends, but that's exactly what makes their partnership interesting. You can criticize individual lines or jokes, but turning one piece of dialogue into proof that the entire show is attacking Hal Jordan misses what Lanterns is actually accomplishing. It's building the characters, building the mystery, and building the Green Lantern world. And that's exactly what this series needs to do. And it just reestablishes that this DC universe, this current one, is off to a better start despite one bad movie. The video is coming to an end. Thank you once again for giving me your time, and thank you for the comments and everything else. As usual, have a great day. It's all about attitude. There is no progress without struggle, so stay in there. I've been your host, Mrbeefy, and you've all been fantastic.
Sit back and listen to the beat.